Christian Church Disciples of Christ grew out of two movements seeking Christian unity that sprang up almost simultaneously in western Pennsylvania and Kentucky. Movements that were backlashes against the rigid denominationalism of the early 1800s. Thomas and Alexander Campbell in Pennsylvania, and Barton Stone in Kentucky. The aims and practices of the two groups were similar, and the Campbell and Stone movements united in 1832 in Lexington, Kentucky, after about a quarter of a century of separate development. The history of disciples, like much of our national history, is absent references to women and their involvement in our denomination's development for more than 40 years of our early history. The women's rights movement of 1848 laid the groundwork. The 1861 Women's Union Missionary Society movement gained widespread endorsement for the Great Awakening among women. While the church was evolving, the country was also in the midst of a civil war that undoubtedly affected the church as well as society. During these early years, women did not have the right to vote, and they certainly were not seen as able to take on most leadership roles, including church leadership. However, during the Civil War, many women were heavily involved in raising and distributing aid to the soldiers. As they did this work, they discovered skills, abilities, and power that neither they nor the rest of the nation recognized. In 1873, the Anti-Saloon Campaign and the founding of the Women's Christian Temperance Union included many disciples women. Carrie Nation gained notoriety by her fierce aggression toward saloons, an aggression based on her childhood memories of a drunken, abusive father and a first husband who also had a drinking problem. In stark contrast, another disciples woman, Zerelda Wallace, whose passion for reform of alcohol abuses was equal to Carrie's, found expression in a different way. She was so opposed to alcohol that she refused for several weeks to take the communion cup. She rose from her seat one Sunday and gave her reasons for declining the wine in a short speech, which was the death knell to the use of spirituous liquors in churches. Carolyn Neville Paris, an educator and wife of a minister, taught at Christian colleges in Missouri, Kentucky, and Ohio. The Easter of 1874, when she was about to turn 43, she was particularly moved by the especially meaningful Easter service. As her husband preached about the redemptive grace of God, aimed at drawing all of humanity into a new relationship with the risen Christ, incredible joy swept over her at the renewed recognition that the gift of the grace of God is for everyone. She had already been concerned about the lack of work being done to share the good news both at home and around the world. That Friday after Easter, in April of 1874, she sat down in her favorite chair for her daily Bible reading and prayer with all of this on her heart. As she sat there in her devotions, it came to her that she should become involved in organizing the women of the church to do this work. She immediately began to lay the groundwork for what would later become a $1.5 million enterprise, organized and managed exclusively by women. Both men and women became missionaries doing mission work, including educational, benevolent, medical, industrial, and directly evangelistic. This was unique in that all business of the organization was managed by women, who collected and dispersed the funds, and employed and directed our missionaries. This was the first organization of women doing home mission work. Disciples women have amazing strengths in organizing and relationship building, which is a hallmark of their faith. Mrs. Paris wrote letters to many leaders in the church and began strategic planning to organize to achieve what God was calling them to do. She wrote to women in 6 different states she had chosen very carefully. By the time the arrangements for the 1874 General Convention were completed, women across several states had met in local groups, affirmed the call to organize missionary societies, and had begun to collect offerings for spreading the good news, even though there was not yet a national treasury or even a stated enterprise to move the work forward. When the convention met, 75 women from 9 different states met in the basement of the church to listen to Mrs. Paris make a statement regarding the purpose of the meeting. Mrs. Paris later addressed the convention of men, defying tradition and urging support for foreign missions. In October of that year, they had their first organizing meeting of the Christian Women's Board of Missions. They made no distinction between home and foreign missions. Their field was the world. The Board of Missions provided training programs that equipped thousands of young people and established 4 Bible chairs at state universities. In 1876, CWBM sent their first missionary to Jamaica. This did not mean that it was smooth sailing. Many voices were raised in opposition when the news was received in congregations, resulting in sermons, letters, and stands against this new freedom for women. An organization organized and operated solely by women was beyond acceptance by those who firmly believed a woman's place was in the home, period. By the end of the Civil War, a groundswell of activities on all fronts was evident among women, and an uneasiness crept across the male-dominated systems and institutions. In 1882, missionaries were sent to Bombay, India by the CWBM. In 1885, they opened a Bible school for children, then a weekday school, then visitation with women in their homes. In 1883, resources became available to publish a resource planned since the first organizational meeting, Missionary Tidings. In 1886, another group of women in St. Louis, recognizing a need to assist poor and orphan children, and led by Mattie Yunkin, began what is now the National Benevolent Association, the social services ministry of the church. Efforts to minister to orphans had been made in several states prior to the Civil War, but without lasting success. Organized benevolence grew slowly among disciples, perhaps due to the anti-institutionalism preached by early disciples' leaders. The NBA was established in 1887. Again, relationship building and organization show forth as hallmarks of faith. In 1889, Clara Babcock was ordained. She was also one of the leaders in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Following a speaking engagement representing the WCTU, the congregation urged her to become their minister. She participated in 28 annual revivals and served as pastor at churches in Illinois, Iowa, and North Dakota. In 1892, Sarah Lou Bostick became one of the first African American women to be ordained in the Disciples Church. She was born in 1868 and was one of 10 children, largely self-educated and fiercely independent. She organized at least 6 women's societies in Arkansas. She was appointed state organizer among the black congregations in Arkansas in 1902. Her great vision for educational opportunities for her black brothers and sisters led to her invitation to organize missionary societies in Texas. Mrs. Bostick became the national president of the Negro CWBM. She was a pioneer in black and white women joining efforts to move their mission goals forward. Jarvis Christian College is the only missionary institution established by CWBM for the training of African Americans that is still in existence. Her commitment to relationships and organization strengthened her work. In the early 1900s, CWBM was the first of the National Disciples Boards to reach out to people of Spanish, Mexican, and Puerto Rican descent. Mission stations serving Hispanic communities were begun in several locations along the Texas-Mexico border, but one still in full operation is the Inman Christian Center in San Antonio. One of the hallmarks of faith of Disciples Women is inclusion of all diversity. In 1919, the United Christian Missionary Society was formed and began its new life in 1920. 53% of the assets came from the CWBM, $1.4 million, as well as a well-defined network of 26 states and more than 4,100 local auxiliary organizations, a mailing list of 60,000 subscribers of its magazines, and mission stations on 4 continents. While it was a momentous time, it was not a happy one, with women turning all this over to male leadership and giving up the autonomy they had had for 45 years. The UCMS was a merging of the CWBM and the Foreign Christian Missionary Society, with the hope that shared leadership would be part of the partnership, which was not realized until 1971. In the 100 years since the UCMS was formed, there has been a century of amazing work. Celebrating the Golden Jubilee in 1924, an extra $1 million was raised for mission. Mission and ministry continue to be a hallmark of Disciples Women faith. In 1937, while Minnie Vautrin, a Disciples woman from Illinois, was serving the Jinling College previously established by the Board of Missions and their partners, the Japanese mounted an invasion of China, referred to as the Nanking Massacre. Japanese troops killed remnant Chinese soldiers in violation of the laws of war, murdered Chinese civilians, raped Chinese women, and destroyed or stole Chinese property on a scale that will never be known. The violence and destruction were extensive, with the number dead estimated at 300,000. At times, she harbored up to 10,000 women in buildings designed to support between 200 and 300. She became known as the American Goddess at the Rape of Nanking, based on her selfless acts to save thousands of lives of Chinese women and girls. She was posthumously awarded the emblem of the Blue Jade by the Chinese government. Supporting and standing in solidarity with other women is a hallmark of Disciples Women faith. In 1986, the Woman to Woman Worldwide program was designed to put North American women in personal contact with women in other countries, to provide opportunities to personalize mission in the life of congregations. The first journey was launched in 1989. This continues to be a healthy, life-giving, life-changing, and self-sustaining ministry. This journey builds relationships among the women in the delegation, as well as with their global sisters. When the women return, they share their experience and what they have learned, and encourage others to support the programs that Global Ministries has established with these partners. Disciples Women continues to build relationships in the global sisterhood. In 1989, Disciples Women began focusing on specific social action emphases, with domestic violence being the first. Also, the focus has been economic justice for women, racism, nurturing the girl child, and human trafficking, including the emphasis on the vulnerability of immigrants and refugees. 2010 was the year the Principles of Mutuality established Disciples Women's Ministries as a self-determining ministry in close covenant with DHM. 2011 marked the beginning of Disciples Women operating as a self-determining ministry. As part of this change, the executive director of Disciples Women became a general cabinet member, including General Assembly report and non-voting representation on the general board. This inclusion of women's voices in general leadership provided the opportunity for the majority of the church to be in leadership participation, and offered the opportunity for the ministries of Disciples Women to build relationships with other general ministries, which resulted in a number of collaborations with those general ministry partners. In 2015, the IDWM Executive Committee commissioned Yewa Lee to create the Her Story Tree logo to illustrate connectedness, relationship, and diversity of Disciples Women. In 2019, the Her Story Continues Fund was established with the Christian Church Foundation to fund women's ministries into the future. This fund is invested in CCF's Sarah Lou Bostic Fund, which focuses on ethical companies not involved in weapons, fossil fuels, or perpetuating the Israeli-Palestine conflict. CCF has taken seriously the justice and social action focus of Disciples Women and works in collaboration toward the same goals. Throughout the Disciples Women's history, they have been resilient because of their focus on mission, relationship building, organization, standing together with other women, breaking down barriers, collaboration, partnerships, and faithful prayer and worship. While women have long been the driving force of mission, outreach, and justice, they were not always included in the decision-making and goal-setting. Disciples Women was committed to reconciliation and anti-racism and was living into it even before the denomination turned its focus to that important goal. Women continue to be leaders in their congregations, and now their voice at the general level has given them the opportunity to educate others on the practices that make them resilient and unified, and to encourage others to work in collaboration to share with the world the grace and love of God.